So it's now 3 p.m. Geneva time. We can officially launch this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, welcome to this new Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogue, a series of events that we have launched before the adoption 2 years ago of a historic resolution at the United Nations Environment Assembly, setting up the path to a global treaty to end plastic pollution. Let me remind everybody that this series of dialogues making links with ongoing multilateral processes to tackle plastic pollution is organized by the Geneva Environment Network in collaboration with the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention Secretariat, the Center for International Environmental Law, the Global Governance Center at the Graduate Institute, IUCN, the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs, known as TESS, the University of Geneva, and the governments of Norway and of Switzerland. For each session, we partner also with other relevant stakeholders. The Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee to develop the international legally binding instrument that was set up following the adoption of the resolution will meet for its fifth session at the end of November in Busan, in the Republic of Korea. And many will refer to this meeting session as the INC5. Two ad hoc intersessional open-ended expert groups were established at the last session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. These have been meeting regularly online and will be meeting in person in Bangkok, Thailand at the end of August. On the sidelines, informal intersessional work is also ongoing with various stakeholders holding discussions such as the one we are now having. The Road to Busan event series, organized as part of the Geneva Big Plastic Pollution Dialogues in collaboration with various partners that we started in June, provides member states and stakeholders a platform to prepare for the upcoming negotiation and these expert group sessions that I have mentioned. Today's event is organized with the International Pollutants Elimination Network, known as IPEN, and will seek to contribute to the expert group discussion on health and environmental protective criteria and non-criteria based approaches for products and chemicals. We are joined by leading experts that our moderator, Lia Esquillo, who is the director of programs at IPEN, will be introducing as she gives them the floor. I take also this opportunity to warmly thank our colleagues and friends from IPEN for the energy they have put in the preparation of this session. You will be formally welcomed to this event by Ms. Valentina Sierra from the Directorate of Environment at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Uruguay. Ms. Sierra was the former focal point for the environment at the Uruguay Permanent Mission here in Geneva and has been part of the bureaus of various important bodies in the United Nations Chemicals and Waste Cluster. She's therefore well placed to make relevant links on the topic we are discussing today. And before you are formally welcome, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of the event will be made available as usual on the webpage of this event. Throughout the event, you can raise questions by using the Q&A box. The transcript is also available for who is in 100 languages as indicated in this slide. So now moving to the welcome and opening of this event, we are delighted to give now the floor to Ms. Valentina Sierra to formally welcome you.
Thank you very much, Diana. Hello, dear colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon. I know we are in different time zones. Thank you very much, Diana, from the Geneva Environment Network. And I would like also to thank IPEN for organizing this timely event and also for the invitation to join this panel with these distinguished experts. As you may already know, the chemicals, plastic products, and design are closely linked issues. As plastics are made of chemicals, this provision can be the backbone of the treaty to ensure that plastics are made to be more durable, less polluting, reusable, and to increasing recycling. INC5, as you know, will take place this November in Busan, and is scheduled to be the last INC. So the negotiation process needs to be concluded in that stage. Therefore, it is crucial that member states have a clear and common understanding, not only of what could be achieved, but also on how it should be achieved. Agreeing on intersessional work at INC4 and being able to establish this open-ended expert group was indeed a great step forward, and it shows its relevance to member states and that we can make progress and agree on tackling these issues jointly. The intersessional work is not a negotiation, as you know, but its goal is to focus on the technical discussions as well as on advancing the negotiators' understanding on how such these complex issues can be addressed and solved. Scientists have been telling us that plastics are made of thousands of chemicals. Around 16,000 have been already identified, and of these, 4,000 are potentially toxic. In addition, many more chemicals have unknown properties, and we don't know yet what's their impact on the human health and the environment. And this is one of the reasons why it's crucial to have a scientific approach and to ensure a safe circular economy. For developing countries as ours, this is a major challenge. Not only through the framework, the only way that we could tackle this issue is with the framework of an international legally binding agreement. Is the only solution we can find, as we don't have the necessary tools, for instance, to conduct this type of assessments. Other conventions that already exist, as BRS, regulate some specific chemicals, but these approaches were not established to address the diverse layers of complexity that plastics pose to the world. Finally, for Uruguay, it's crucial to advance on these technical discussions during the open-ended expert groups meetings to fill the information gaps, and by achieving a better understanding of these relevant topics, we will have better tools and we will be able to get member states' positions closer to reach an ambitious agreement at INC5. I look forward to learning from these discussions, and I'm sure it's going to support the ongoing work of experts that they have been meeting online. They will have two more meetings virtually, and then finally they will have a face-to-face meeting in Bangkok from the 24th to the 28th of August. So thank you very much, and I wish you a very good panel.
Very much, Valentina, for setting the scene for our webinar and for welcoming us all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. So now I would like to invite Dr. Tadesse Amera to provide the opening remarks. Tadesse is one of the invited technical resource persons in the ad hoc intersessional open-ended expert group 2. Tadesse, please go ahead.
Thank you, Leah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. I'm nominated by the INC Secretariat as a technical resource person of the expert group 2 in my personal capacity. Expert group 2 had two virtual meetings on July 18 and July 30, and the third virtual meeting will be conducted next week on August 13. Sorry. The output of this working group the process would include one, identification and analysis of criteria and then criteria-based approach regarding plastic products and chemicals of concern in plastic products, and product design focusing on recyclability and reusability of plastic products, considering their uses and applications. The second one is issues identified by the expert group for consideration by the committee at INC5 in Busan. And the last one is other concrete products that may be identified by the expert group for consideration at INC5. In the two virtual meetings, some questions through a questionnaire were distributed to experts and reflections were presented. It was announced that this is intersessional work, and as Valentina also clearly indicated, is not a negotiation process. But from what I see, some experts nominated by countries were presenting their country positions on the issues. Some are pro and some are con. With regards to the inputs from the technical resource persons, the Secretariat, in consultation with the chair, will invite selected technical resource persons to help inform the work of the expert group. The selected technical resource persons may be invited to also provide information to the co-chairs upon request to the extent that it's relevant to the mandate of the expert group for the discussion during the intersessional period. Beyond ad hoc provisional information, the technical resource persons will further be requested by the co-chairs to participate in ad hoc meetings with the co-chairs. And we are also invited to attend the virtual and in-person expert group meetings. So this is a technical group, the technical resource person group, which is 12 in number, and group 1 also has 12. So the 12 of us are attending this meeting, and we are supporting the co-chairs of this group to give technical inputs in the process. And as has been also indicated, we are nominated in our personal capacity, and we are advised also to stand professionally, and we are planning also to contribute professionally with professional integrity. So we will focus, we will see from the OAWG and from the UNIA declaration to the last INC4, we see all the processes, and also we will see especially the health aspect and the toxics aspect of plastics, and how this will be incorporated so that the declaration and the UNIA resolution is getting attention and on paper in the coming INC. So we are in that process, and we will have the next meeting next week. And after that, we will be in Bangkok, and we will contribute more in that. That's what's going on so far. With this note, I would like to open this meeting for a detailed discussion. Thank you very much again, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Tadesse, for that informative overview of what the work of Expert Group 2 is and what has happened so far. So thank you. So friends, now I'd like to introduce the structure of today's webinar. Our session is divided into two parts. The first part will focus on various approaches regulating chemicals in plastics, where we will hear from several experts on their perspectives and experiences. The second part will be a panel discussion where we will delve deeper into specific challenges and expectations related to regulating chemicals in plastics. After that, we hope to have some time for open discussion before closing the webinar. We're so happy to see that there's quite a large number of people joining the webinar. It shows how important this topic is, for all of us. So before we proceed, I'd like to extend in advance our heartfelt thanks to all our distinguished speakers and panelists for joining us today. Your insights and expertise are invaluable to this discussion. So on to the first part. Our first speaker for this segment is Yuyun Ismawati, Senior Advisor and co-founder of the Nexus for Health, Environment and Development Foundation based in Indonesia. Yuyun is also a member of the IPEN Steering Committee. Yuyun will talk about the sectoral approach to chemicals in plastics in Indonesia, with a focus on recent developments in chemicals in packaging. Yuyun, you have 7 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, Leah. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, delegates and participants. Thank you for Geneva Environmental Network and IPEN for organizing this, and let me to join this discussion. I would like to start with this slide. Hang on. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I think because I am the first one, I would like to take the opportunity to introduce this. I call it Nasty 9. That's the troubling toxic chemicals used in plastics mainly. So these 9 chemicals are found in many plastic products in different form and different concentrations to make the plastic products to deliver its purpose. However, these chemicals also has been widely researched, and a huge body of knowledge already demonstrated the migration and leaching of these chemicals from the products into human body. And unfortunately, my country also, in one of the recent research, shows that Indonesians has the highest consumption of microplastics intake per month, and that's ridiculous. But although the industry in Indonesia keeps saying that the consumption of plastics are still the lowest in the region, but looking at the reality due to the mismanagement of plastics, that's the results. Plastics get into our body, and low doses matter. Researchers explain that even in low doses, those chemicals can affect our body for a long time. And this different function of the chemicals made the plastics serve its purpose. With that, also many research shows that the cancer cases increase 70%. Well, the WHO predicted by 2050, the cancer cases will be increased to 77%. And if you see the map, colorful map, unfortunately, it's not a nice situation, but it shows how far and how fast the cancer cases have been spread out all over the world. And mainly it's contributed due to the environmental factors and also the endocrine disruptor chemicals used in plastics. And with this fact, also researchers predicted that by 2045, male reproductive health also will be declining near zero. And this is the humanity crisis. And this is why, because we use chemicals. And go to the Indonesia, the country level, with the huge production of plastics, more than 6 million, more than 9 million a year, million tons a year. The majority of plastic products are used in food and beverage sector. And then after that, for building and automotive and also other sectors. But the major type of plastics used in Indonesia are the PE and PETs, and also other type of plastics. Unfortunately, these plastics in Indonesia only recycled about 9% up to 11% due to unsynchronized waste management collections and recycling system. So recently, last month, the Ministry of Development Planning just issued the roadmap and national action plan on circular economy for the next 20 years. And one of the sector that has been looking at in this national action plan and roadmap is the retail sector, focusing on plastic packaging. And with these stages and steps every 5 years, there are some priorities there. And if you look at the some of the points below, it shows that one of the strategy is to increase recycled content to 50% for all type of plastics. Unfortunately, this roadmap and action plan do not talk about the chemicals content in plastics at all. So the intention to have or increase the recyclability of plastics might go to the wrong way and ended up in the wrong results. Another position of the ministry in Indonesia, for instance, the Ministry of Industry, to support the plastic industry and the position of the industry in Indonesia for the upcoming negotiation. One of it is to propose an additional sector for plastic recycling to receive, they call it tax allowance or the exemption from paying revenue taxes. But also tax will be waived if industry also imported virgin materials and certain products like on the list. But on the other side, also the Ministry of Industry already established and pushed for the national standard for certain products. There are 33 new standard, especially addressing plastics. Unfortunately, once again, there is no chemicals of concern mentioned in the standard. And the scary one for me is the bottom part, that mineral water should use recycled plastic content at least 1% without any basis of decision or academic scientific review. And recently also the Indonesian FDA prepared a new draft regulation for food packaging. And one of it is to include four new contact substances, food contact substances, for instance, PFAS, BPA, and BPS. So I'm happy to see PFAS that we have advocated in the last 2 years has been included in the new regulation, and also BPA and BPS. However, again, when I look at the draft, which is 243 pages, it's not easy to look at the chemicals of concern because they are all elaborated in a form of congeners. And this will be going to be a problem because if it's not regulated under a group or a class, then it has to be elaborated further because the substitutes of those chemicals could be regretful or creating the same problem. So I see the challenges at the country level to look at and discuss the chemicals of concerns are as follows. One is the information and data should be shared, especially on chemicals of concern, and the production should be shared by the industry to the authority. And the excuse to have it as proprietary or trade secrets cannot be accepted because we all got cancer, and it's not a secret anymore that everyone exposed to these EDCs. And then there's an important need to have the health sector awareness on chemicals, especially plastic chemicals, as the environmental factor to the non-communicable diseases. And the lack of laboratory in developing countries made it difficult for the authorities to analyze chemicals of concern. Then it will be difficult for them to set the standards. Also, the hazards and risk assessments of the chemical cocktails, because it's not only the effect of one chemicals, but when they put together in one product, it will be a mix of everything. And all of these regulations, when it's stipulated already, we need to see trade-related regulations. So the permit to import that products and that certain chemicals also have to be regulated. And then some countries already developed the action plans or roadmaps for their industrial sector. These need to be reviewed because it will be kind of like obsolete if the treaty is discussed and adopted. And of course, the financial incentives for the industry, plastic industry, should be reviewed, and monitoring evaluation also should engage stakeholders meaningfully. So for considerations for delegates who's looking forward to have a meeting in Bangkok by the end of this month, it's important to have data and information sharing with the same terminology. So every agencies will have the same terminology and agreed term when discuss it at the negotiation meeting later in Busan. And evidence of health impact of the NASTI 9 already available, but politicians have to adopted it so they can translate it into policy and regulation. We need to strengthen the transparency of pollution control, monitoring and reporting of the plastic industry, especially also supported by a strong laboratory capacity and verification center for labeling. And then lastly, the priority sectors has to be free from NASTI 9, the food and beverage, that's the priority sector, and then healthcare sector, and especially children products, including toys. So we will have a toxic-free circular economy. So this is also the term that have to be agreed by all of us, especially by delegates, that what we want is not circulating the toxic of chemicals, but toxic-free circular economy. Thank you, Ria. Give it back to you.
Thank you too so much, Ibu Yuyun, for that insightful presentation, for giving us a glimpse on the sectoral approach in Indonesia. Thank you also for emphasizing the problems, the challenges in regulating chemicals in plastics in Indonesia, as well as what you view our considerations or the ways forward to resolve the problem. Thank you so much for your presentation. Now, moving on, our next speaker, we have Sivan Bintain, the REACH and Classification, Labeling and Packaging Team Leader at the European Commission. Sivan will discuss the EU's approach to chemicals regulation in products and the proposed conceptual approach to regulating chemicals in plastics. Sivan, you have 7 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Leah, and thanks for the organizer allowing me to introduce what we would like to propose to list chemicals in the treaty. So as explained by Yuyun, I mean, it's quite obvious that both at the EU but also internationally, the risk for human health and the environment of substance containing plastic product, demonstrate a huge risk, not only during their use, but also during their production, but also at the waste stage. So we believe that we need to act under the Plastic Treaty on Chemicals. This will ensure also a clean, non-toxic and safe and circular material cycles, allowing to have a proper recycling of plastic. So the chemical aspect is very important for us in the treaty. And therefore, we developed a conceptual approach that you will see the next slide. I assume that you start to become very familiar with this approach because we presented in different forum, but also we introduced it at INC4. We are still working on this approach. We try to adapt by listening to what is said during the virtual meetings, but also by NGOs, industry, and other parties. So this is still a moving approach, but we would like to present the current situation. So the idea it's mainly coming from what is done at the EU, but also at the Stockholm Convention. So we developed a 3-step approach for listing chemicals in Annex A of the future treaty. So the first step, it's to give the possibility for a party to nominate a substance that could be listed in the Annex A. And this step is the very first step, and it's only hazard-based. So I will show later on the different criteria that we would like to apply for this hazard-based approach. But the idea is that if a substance fulfills the criteria, and if the criteria and the dossier developed by the party is endorsed by the technical committee that could be set up during the treaty, it could be proposed to the COP to be listed in the Annex A. And this very first step will be linked to some provision. So provision about, for example, minimizing exposure and emission, but also to push for substitution, to move for more transparency of the use of a substance, but also related to traceability of problematic chemical in plastic. And we believe that this is very important because we will see the criteria. We are dealing with very problematic chemicals, what we call, for example, in the EU, substance of very high concern. And we believe that for these chemicals, before going directly to restriction, there is a need to act to push for their substitution. So the idea is that as soon as a substance is listed in Annex A, there are some direct downstream consequences for different provisions of the treaty. This approach is already implemented in the EU, but also in other jurisdictions, and it's quite successful. It really allows us to substitute a bit more quickly problematic chemicals. It alerts industry about which chemical will be probably the next on the list for restriction. So it gives some predictability for industry to act on a quick substitution. The second step, it's mainly based on what is done under the Stockholm Convention by the work done by the POP Review Committee. And this second step is not limited to hazard-based, but it will be risk-based approach. And this risk-based approach will be complemented by another assessment dealing with the evaluation, for example, of the socioeconomic aspect of acting on a substance, but also on the assessment of possible alternative that could help the POP Review Committee, but also later on the COP, to identify the need, for example, for specific exemption for specific parties, or if necessary, to have more generic exemption for the proposed restriction. This could be, for example, for some specific uses, like what some call essential uses. So this second step, it's could be quite a heavy process, but it gives the possibility for parties, for stakeholders, to provide input in the assessment by providing information about what could be the consequence of a restriction, what could be the benefit of a ban of a substance in plastic product, and so on. So it's a quite an interesting process. It's quite successful at the Stockholm Convention. It allows the COP to take some decision quite quickly based on a robust and scientific assessment. So this second step will allow the committee, so the technical committee, to conclude and to give advice to the COP. And the advice could be to go for total elimination of a specific substance or a group of substances in all plastic and plastic product. It could be also to focus on very specific plastic or very specific plastic products, like, for example, toys. And it can also conclude if a risk is not identified, or if the risk management measures already in place are enough to manage the risk, to not propose any additional measures. So based on this robust scientific assessment, the COP will take a decision and will decide if indeed the substance should be restricted, and if some derogation, so generic one, like we call in the Stockholm Convention, acceptable purpose, need to be set up. It also gives a possibility for country, depending on their specific situation or specific needs, to ask for a derogation. And this derogation, at least in the Stockholm, and we would like to propose the same, is more or less automatic for 5 years, the first request. And then after 5 years, this exemption will be reviewed. So this could be the main aspect that we would like to propose, allowing to list some substance in the Annex A. The next slide will illustrate what we believe should be the different provision that will be the outcome of a listing of a substance based on the very first step, so based on the hazard-based approach. So the first one is linked to product design. So we believe that indeed, if a problematic substance like a carcinogen is present in some product, we need to push to ensure that at least the emission from that product of that substance is limited, or even better, replaced. It would give some obligation to minimize exposure and emission to avoid or to minimize risk to human health and the environment, both for consumers and workers. Trade aspect is quite important. So it will limit the possibility to export some chemicals if the uses will be restricted. There is a need also to ensure a better transparency and also a labeling provision for the substance listed. This will allow to identify, for example, in which plastic product a substance is present, a substance of concern is present, allowing to take this into account when we move to the recycling of that product. Monitoring aspect is also quite important, and therefore, as I said before, the listing will ensure that industry will have knowledge about the substances that are seen as problematic at the international level, and then they can work on their substitution. Next slide. About the hazard criteria. So we believe that we will need to fix them, allowing to have an harmonized approach. There are some obvious ones, for example, what we call CMRs, so carcinogen, mutagen, or toxic for production. We believe that this should be a must as a criteria, in particular the one listed in category 1. But we also believe that the substance are presenting some persistence properties, bioaccumulative properties, and toxic properties need to be also taken into account. Even if these criteria on PBT and VPVB, we call them, are not yet in UNGHS, we are discussing them at UN level, but they are already implemented in different jurisdictions with more or less the same criteria. So we believe that they are already, to some extent, internationally recognized. So it could be proposed as a criteria. We also believe that other criteria need to be taken into account, so the hazardous properties, and we propose to have a kind of a safety net approach, but we can call it equivalent level of concern, allowing to also give the possibility for parties to nominate substances having endocrine disruptors property, for example, or being respiratory sensitizer. We believe that these substances are quite problematic as well. Some specific substances having specific toxicity are also quite important. In particular, the one that are immunotoxicant and neurotoxicant could be obvious target as well. And the last one are the one that are problematic for water resource. So we pollute groundwaters and also drinking waters. To give you some example, we have the obvious PFAS that are very problematic for water resources. So we believe that also the safety net could allow to capture substances that are mobile and pollute water resources. Next slide. We also believe that it could be good, as we did for the POP Convention, to already have an initial list of substances that could be introduced in the treaty from the start. So we wanted to give here just a few examples of perhaps obvious one. So we have the phthalate, we have some flame retardant, we have the UV filters, we have the bisphenol A that is quite an obvious case. Here we can perhaps focus as a starting point to some specific uses. We have some metallic compounds, and it's one of the reasons why we believe that the Stockholm Convention is not enough, because obviously the Stockholm Convention cannot deal with inorganic compounds. So we believe that acting on cadmium compounds and lead compounds could also be very important as a starting point under this treaty. I exhaust, I think, the time that I have, so I don't think I have another slide. So I would like to give back the floor to Leah. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Sivan. Thank you for your thorough presentation of EU's approach to chemicals regulation in products and the proposed conceptual approach to regulating chemicals in plastics. Even if we've heard it before, I think repetition helps, no, in understanding. So thank you again, Sivan, for joining us and presenting the proposals again. So moving on to the next presenter, our next speaker is Professor Yin-Wei Li, Executive Director of the Basel Convention Regional Center for Asia and the Pacific, and professor at the School of Environment, Tsinghua University in China. Professor Li will provide insights into national approaches to chemicals in plastics. Professor Li, you have 7 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for inviting me to attend this important webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, afternoon, and evening. Thank you very much for inviting me to share current status of the environmental management of chemicals and which related to plastic in China. I'm Jinhui Li from Basel Convention and the Stockholm Convention Regional Center, and also working in School of Environment at Tsinghua University. Next slide. The environmental management system for chemicals in China covered two areas. The first is the priority control chemicals list, emerging pollutants management. This is two parts. In addition, there are specific regulation or standards in key products related to plastic. Next, please. Next, yeah. In 2017 and 2020, China issued two batches of the priority controlled chemicals list, focusing on the chemicals that pose significant hazard to environment and human health, which may persistent in the environment for a long period and pose unreasonable risk to the environment and human health. The development of the list of priority controlled chemicals are guided by a guideline for screening of priority assessment chemical substance. The screening indicators including PBT or PVB, CMRS, categories 1A or 1B, PT or BT, other hazards such as EDC, and evidence for environment exposure, chemicals with potential environment exposure such as large annual production or use quantities widely dispersed use, etc. Next, please. There are several chemicals which used in plastic now listed in the priority controlled chemicals, including POPs such as SCCP, HBCDD, PFOS, including their salt, and PFOS, PFOSF, and also DECA BDE, PAH, P4, including the salt and the related compounds, and also including heavy metals such as cadmium and lead, and also including nonylphenol and nonylphenol polyoxyethylene ether. Next, please. Secondly, with related to the management of emerging pollutants, China has issued the action plan on controlling new pollutants and list of new pollutants under key control. The list focuses on emerging pollutants that have significant environment and health hazards, which environmental risks have already been demonstrated and has been strongly concerned by public and have been widely concerned or by public or have been widely concerned or listed under the International Environmental Convention. There are also several chemicals used in plastics that have been listed, including PFOS, PFOSF, PFOA, and PFOS-related compounds and the salt, etc. is listed in this slide. Next, please. Setting environment for plastic products is also an important part of management of chemicals in plastic in China. General principles and requirement of eco-design for products which released in 2009 point out that the product eco-design are encouraged to consider cost, environment impact, products performance, regulatory requirement, best available technology, and customer demand, etc. It should consider multi-factors along full life cycle, such as environmental impact and human health. The evaluation indicators of chemicals in eco-design, including carcinogenic, mutagenic, etc. You can see the requirement in this slide. For the eco-design standard for specific products such as PVC, PET, and PBT. There are also different requirements for heavy metals such as cadmium, lead, mercury, chromium, etc. Next, please. China has set limited on harmful substance in a variety of products by regulation or standard, among which many are related to plastics such as electrical and electronic products, food contact material, and baby bottle toys, furniture, cosmetics, etc. Currently controlled substances including parslate, bisphenol, etc. in this slide you can see. Next, please. So that's conclude my sharing with you. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Professor Lee for your very informative and comprehensive presentation of China's national approach in managing chemicals in plastics. Yeah, I found it very interesting and instructive. Thank you, Professor Lee. So now, friends, so we've heard Indonesia, we've heard China, we've heard the EU, the EU's approach. Now we will slightly shift to more general perspective in terms of how chemicals in plastics could be managed, could be regulated. So our next speaker, I would like now to invite Ana Paula Sousa, Human Rights Officer at the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, to speak about the human rights approach to regulating chemicals in plastics. Anna, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Leah. It's a pleasure to take part in this event today, and I would like to thank especially IPEN and Jen for bringing together different views and contributions, especially of civil society organizations and rights holders that must inform the INC intersessional process. I could not stress this more. Well, as we heard already, there are thousands of plastic chemicals that have been identified as toxic due to their harmful effects on human health or the environment. Yet there is currently information on adverse impacts of only about 4,200 of the more than 16,000 chemicals identifying manufacturing and or present in final packaging, with fewer than 1% regulated in existing global MEAs. Science also tells us that the environmental degradation exposure to harmful chemicals present in plastic materials and products can cause chronic or acute illness, developmental problems, or premature death, interfering with individuals' rights to health and to life. Those facts are undeniable today. But one may ask, why regulating chemicals in plastics is a human rights issue? Well, all states already have obligations to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. This extends to protecting people from foreseeable and preventable human rights harms caused by all forms of environmental degradation, including plastic pollution. The right to health has particular significance in this regard. All people everywhere have the right to the highest attainable standard of health, which implies that plastics material and products that contain chemicals and additives that can harm human health should be removed from circulation everywhere, and not only in some states, including those that have infrastructure and technology available to protect their populations from these harms. If it harms human health, it harms all people everywhere, meaning that chemicals in plastics needs to be regulated through IMEA. At the same time, regulation of chemicals in plastics should be guided by the prevention and precautionary approaches, which requires controlling and avoiding toxic additives and chemicals of concern in virgin and recycled plastic polymers to be done in accordance with the hazard-based criteria, a criteria that prioritizes human, ecological, and environmental safety under the presumption that toxic chemicals are too dangerous to be used safely. Another argument that justifies the need to regulate chemicals in plastics is the move to a no-toxic circular economy for plastics. Without an obligation requiring plastic products on the market to be non-toxic, circularity becomes a buzzword to promote recycling without the assurances that it does not further harm human health, and the environment. The lack of transparency, inaccessibility, and unavailability of information is also of concern in this context. All people have a right to access information about the known and suspected health and environmental hazards, harms, and risks caused by chemicals used in and released throughout the plastic life cycle. But there is little transparency about these hazards and risks, so individuals are unable to make informed decisions. That means that not only the treaty must regulate chemicals in plastics, it must also contain provisions only allowing chemicals in plastics that have publicly available toxicity data. This provision would align the treaty with the right to access to information. It's also important to note that access to information must ensure full transparency related to health and safety information and not be subject or conditional to industry interests. States have already agreed to this under the Stockholm Convention, so these ideas should not be considered controversial. We must also bear in mind that plastics can cross several national boundaries during their lifespan, be it through trade, litter, and so on, meaning that human health and the environment cannot be protected only with voluntary targets or what is being called no-criteria approaches, which I am not so sure what this means in any case. In closing, we need an ambitious treaty with obligations and strict controls throughout the life cycle of plastics to enable sustainable production and a chemically safe circular economy that is respectful of human rights, including the rights of populations most impacted by plastic pollution. Thank you, Leah. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ana Paula. Excellent and compelling presentation. Good time management too, Ana. Thank you for that. Gives us more time for discussion later. Thank you. Thank you for emphasizing that regulating chemicals in plastics is a human rights issue. And thank you also for identifying different areas, no? How the human rights perspective should be addressed, could be addressed in the plastics treaty. So thank you for that, Ana. Now we have a final presenter for this segment. Okay, we have a part 2 later. Don't worry, we have more time to discuss. So for this segment, up next is Vito Bonsante. He is the Policy and Technical Advisor at IPEN. He will share lessons learned from regulating chemicals in plastics. Vito, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Leah. Thanks a lot for the panel. I think we heard already quite a bit of like interesting ideas that make it compelling, a compelling case to regulate chemicals under the treaty. However, by looking at already the submission from member states in the intersessional process, it doesn't seem to be even if, like as Valentina said at the beginning, like it was quite a landmark that we managed to get this decision to do intersessional work. It is not a given that chemicals are going to be included. So I want to reinforce the case for regulating chemicals under the treaty. First of all, why do we need to regulate chemicals under the treaty? Well, as we already heard, but it's new science, new findings from 2024. We have over 16,000 chemicals that are related to plastics in their making. Some end up in the many end up in the final product. Some don't. But these are this is a huge number of chemicals, and they pose a challenge themselves, particularly because if we see studies from the BRS Secretariat from 2023, it shows that only 1% or less than 1% of these chemicals are regulated. About 128 throughout their are regulated throughout their life cycle, and that means, as it was also underlined by from the European Union. It is what is already being done by other MEAs. And finally, the most worrying part is the fact that about 4,200 chemicals of these 16,000 are known to be hazardous chemicals, and many more are not known. And as Ana Paula said just before, it should be obvious that chemicals that are used in products and that people are exposed to, there should be data around them. But unfortunately, that is not true. So why, finally, it is clear that we need to regulate chemicals under the treaty because plastics are these fossil fuels. I'm trying to click here. I know. More reasons to regulate chemicals. The fact that all statistics, all predictions say that in the future we will have the production of chemicals and plastics is going to grow exponentially. Well, we're hoping that the treaty will be able to curb the production of if the production will continue to increase, this will mean that also exposure of chemicals to harmful chemicals will increase. If we look at this graph, we see that by 2050, we will have almost 4 times as much plastics that would have been produced in the history. And that means 4 times more chemicals, 4 times more exposure. And that there's a simple equation, which means that more plastic production means more plastic pollution, which means more chemical pollution. And there will be more chemicals that will come to the market. More need to be absolutely. The next slide.
Vito, sometimes we can't hear you properly. I think so. There's something wrong with your connection. Yeah. Thank you. But now it seems good. Please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I have a lag with my slides. Finally, one of the final points is the fact that recycling so far has failed, but not only has failed in terms of promise for tackling the issue of overproduction but also the issue that if we recycled plastics that contain toxic substances, we will increase exposure, uncontrolled exposures, because generally we don't know what is in those plastics, what chemicals are in those plastics, because tracking toxic chemical in waste has proved particularly difficult, and we have already the experience under the Stockholm Convention of tracking POPs in stockpiles and in products. Therefore, the principle that we would suggest is that only plastics that are free of toxic chemicals should be reused, refilled, repurposed, and recycled. IPEN has found in several studies that even in recycled plastics, such as toys, as you can see from this study published last year, we found even banned chemicals in new products and new toys that expose children. And therefore, recycling is only a solution if the recycling is without toxic chemicals. Finally, I'm just going to show you a few of our materials and a few of our studies that we have made showing the harms that plastics and the chemicals within can have on human health and on the environment. And finally, a few resources that are directly related to the plastics treaty around criteria and non-criteria approaches, And I think in the panel, we will touch upon some of these more policy-related issues, and you can also read our quick views that we specifically prepared for the next intersessional work meetings. Thank you very much, and I give you back the floor.
Thank you very much, Vito, for your presentation. Thank you for emphasizing yet again why it's important to regulate chemicals in plastics, highlighting some of the data that have already been that are already known, scientific certainties. Thank you. Friends, don't worry, all the presentations will be, and even the recording of this webinar will be available in the GEN website. They'll be available to you. So that ends the first part of our webinar. Now we go to the panel discussion where we will dive deeper into some of the key questions now confronting us on this topic. So thank you all to our speakers for those insightful presentations. In this panel discussion part, we will gladly hear from all the past speakers, including Tadesse and yeah, for our, they could also share their thoughts. So first, we'll hear from Hyacinth Embo. He is the Director of Standards and Controls at the Ministry of Environment, Protection of Nature and Sustainable Development in Cameroon. Thank you for joining us, Hyacinth. No, can you tell us briefly what are the barriers for Cameroon in regulating chemicals in plastics, and what are your expectations for the Plastics Treaty?
Thank you very much. Happy for inviting me to be part of this panel to share our experiences in Cameroon. Plastic pollution is a serious issue of global concern which require an urgent and international response involving all relevant actors at different levels. Many initiatives, projects, and government response now options have been developed to tackle this major environmental problem. But we are still unable to cope with the increasing amount of plastic waste we generate. In addition, there is a lack of coordination among various initiatives and institutions working on plastic, and which we can better lead to have effective response. The question I was asked to work is, what are the barriers based on what we just presented up? Cameroon is classified by the World Bank among low-income countries in terms of human development. It was ranked by United Nations Development Program in 2004 as having position 141 among 177 countries, and falls beyond the bottom cluster of medium and human development countries. Also, according to UNDP report of 2005, chemicals, petroleum refineries, rubber, and plastics industries are grouped as second in the country and represent 17% of manufacturing value added, that is MVA, for 41% of manufacturing employment and 9% of manufactured export. We can say that according to the reports from the National Institute of Statistics and the Ministry of Environment, we know that an average of 122 million tons of plastic that is imported to the country every year. And on the other hand, we have just 647,000 tons of plastic that's exported to the neighboring countries. On the whole, we have a balance. If I look at the balance sheet of about an average of 120 million tons of plastic that is circulating within the country. Now, where does it go? Either we recycle, incinerate, or is dumped at the landfill. Now, what are the type of plastic we see so far? We have, as we listed, followed the example of the presentation from the colleague of the professor from China, we have all of these plastics in the country, including PET, polyethylene, PVC, polyethylene low density, polystyrene. All of these are all we have them, and we have about just 20 establishment establishment in the country are concerned with manufacturing this plastic, either importing it as polymers or as granules. Having this in mind, we just want to say that Cameroon has made tremendous progress in regulating these plastic chemicals in one way or the other, because Cameroon being party to all of these multilateral environmental agreement like Stockholm Convention, Basel, Minamata, Vienne, Evisaikem. This has permitted us to establish policies. For example, we have a series of laws. We have about 5 laws, but I want to just stick one, those that are really more concerned about this. We have a law relating toxic and hazardous waste. We have a law regulating framework, regulating environmental management. In that, you have the formal prohibition of taking into account the international commitment, the introduction, the storage, transit, or of national territory, any waste in all form entry into the country, so it's completely prohibited. We then have a series of decrees too that have actually prohibited the importation or transit of this waste into the country. And as well, we equally have secular actually prohibiting. One of the issues that we actually have a decree instituting the control of plastic or single-use plastic that is less than 61 micron. That if it's greater, you can circulate, but when it's less than, it's ceased, and when you see you are charged with that, with sanctions added to that. We have a national waste management strategy, and as well as national strategy to fight plastic pollution. It's worth noting that this legal instrument makes no reference to the chemical additives contained in plastics, let alone the ingredients used in their production. So it's clear that the country has no regulation in place to address the issue of chemical additives of concern in the millions of plastics that are circulating in the country. So, but we have this control at the level of petroleum products, etc. We have this that is regulating the chemicals in petroleum products. This is one of the barriers. Another barrier that we think we need to highlight is the capacity and weak enforcement measures to ensure compliance. We have the technology to manufacture plastic polymers. Take alone selection of chemicals. These chemicals of concern, and then you have the environmental sound management of facilities for plastics, including legacy plastics. That's the problem we have as barrier. There are a list, but we just want to stay with this. Now, what are the expectations we as a developed a country in transition or developing country, or we may say underdeveloped country? We think that apart from strong financial mechanism to assist developing countries to implement this treaty, we think that with regards to identification and classification of chemicals concerned in plastic, we need to establish a stringent global control measures at the global level to eliminate all the chemicals of concerns in plastic, including a list that will be updated as new information and knowledge are available on chemicals used in plastics. With regards to identification and classification of plastic products, we equally think that you have a stringent global control measures on monomers, for example, like styrene, and polymers like polystyrene and PVCs of concern. The single-use plastic, single-use commodities plastic should also be considered as for elimination, as many of these plastic or these have properties and problems that are commonly associated with plastic pollution. And we think that if we could actually use these measures, we could contribute to these measures, this is going to actually encourage circularity in the economy and also a possible way to cut down pollution.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Hyacinth. Thank you for joining us. And I could feel, really the challenges Cameroon faces in managing plastic and regulating chemicals in plastic. So thank you also for your suggestions, your perspectives on what should be in the Plastics Treaty. Now, let me turn to Sivan. I have a question for you, Sivan. We have several conventions already. You mentioned actually some in your presentation, for example, the Stockholm Convention, and they deal with chemicals in certain ways. Do we need the Plastic Treaty to also cover chemicals, especially considering the global framework on chemicals adopted last year? Sivan, your thoughts?
Thanks, Leah. Yeah, I think the reply from my side is very clear. Yes, we need to act under the Plastic Treaty on chemicals. As you said, the second convention, there are very few chemicals that are listed. The main reason is that not all chemicals fulfill the criteria of the Stockholm Convention. There are very strict criteria. You need the substance to be persistent, bioaccumulable, toxic, and transported to very long distance. So I think we need to have over action for different over type of chemicals. I named the metallic compounds that cannot be tackled under the Stockholm Convention because they are inorganic and not organic. We have also the substances that are only, between brackets, toxic for human health, like the one that are carcinogen, or toxic for reproduction, or mutagen, like the bisphenol, the phthalate, and this one cannot be tackled under the Stockholm Convention. So, and the global framework on chemicals could complement, of course, what will be done under the existing MEA and also under the Plastic Treaty. But there, as you said and demonstrated by other colleagues, there are so many chemicals present in so many different types of products that it could be good to have one treaty dealing with plastic, for example, and then the global framework can deal with other type of product. There are so many things that need to be done. We believe that we need to have a global action, a strong action, mandatory action on plastic product and their chemicals. And what can be done on a voluntary basis on other type of product can be done under the global framework of chemicals. And also the global treaty on plastic will focus on not all chemical used in plastic, but the one that are the most problematic one. But not all chemical will be listed. So we will need also voluntary action by industry. And it's why we think that action under the global framework on chemicals could also be useful to tackle some of the aspects of the plastic issue. But at least that treaty need to act on the most problematic chemicals to ensure that we have a clean material cycles, to ensure recyclability, and also to ensure the protection of human health and the environment. And perhaps I also want to highlight that one of the other issues that we have to face with is that there are a lot of chemicals on the market, and there is a clear data gaps about the knowledge that we have on their hazardous properties. And this also we need to fill a gap there. Even if we have, for example, in the EU, a very strong regulation on chemicals. For example, we don't have a lot of information of polymers because they're outside the scope of registration under our legislation. So also in the EU, even if we believe a very strong legislation, is not enough, for example, to deal with polymer.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for your thoughts and reflections, Sivan, on that question. Now, let me turn to you, Professor Lee, because related to what we've been discussing so far, a study by the BRS Secretariat found that only 1% of chemicals are regulated internationally. And as Sivan also pointed out, mainly by the Stockholm Convention. However, the identification of chemicals is slow and burdensome. So from your perspective, what different approaches can we use?
Thank you, Leah, for your question. I'm very glad to hear that the BRS already compared the global governance of plastic and associated chemicals in this report. So the data mentioned in this report, such 1% is based on review of existing scientific articles. I'm not questioning the quality of this data, but rather to say our chemicals research is far from sufficient. and the data is difficult to support our decision-making. Regarding to the issue of plastic, it's extremely important that we have question if the forms and the contents of these chemicals in plastic products have been detected clearly, not one country, but globally. I'm also see different viewpoint and data in different research report. Therefore, I believe that more research and multi-party verification are needed when using this data for decision making. The second point I want to say is the control of chemical substance should be based on science and based on and meet the needs of sustainable development. The Stockholm Convention has already established a mechanism for adding POPs, including clear qualitative screening criteria and the establishment of the POPs review committee. Through practice, this practice has been proved that adding POPs through the screening criteria in Annex D, risk assessment in Annex E, and social economy consideration in Annex 5 is scientifically reasonable. So I believe that Stockholm Convention have done a good job and enough for dealing with POPs. The third point I would like to say, internationally there have international convention initiative such as Global Framework of Chemicals, BRS Convention, Minamata Convention, etc. And also, you know that Science Policy Panel on Chemicals, Waste and Pollution is expected to be established very soon, which will contribute to more support for decision-making in chemicals. The panel and the Chemicals and Waste Convention can be synergied, and we should give the Science Policy Panel more time, give more expectation, and expect it to play a great role in future. I believe exist mechanism if we can bridge the gap with existing convention and also including the convention in future for plastics. So this mechanism could support the sustainable development on chemicals and waste. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much to Professor Lee for your very thoughtful response. Thank you. Thank you. Now, Yoon, let me turn to you. Most countries agree that circular economy approaches for plastics are important to solve the plastic pollution crisis. No, even in the country, the roadmap. No, you mentioned that. For you, how do you think should circular economy approaches be applied in the plastics treaty, especially with regards to chemicals in plastics? Yoon, we can't hear you.
Yes, thank you, Leah. It's interesting to see the words circular economy has been used in everything, on everything. I really miss to hear the word sustainable production and consumption, which more just and more thoughtful, in my opinion, instead of only talking about circular economy. In regards with plastic circular economy seen by many countries, including Indonesia, as the way out to extend or to demonstrate the sustainable lifestyle and to achieve sustainable development, without considering the chemicals component of certain products, I don't think circular economy will be a good solutions or the ideal solutions to all the problems, especially related to waste and restricted materials. Some from my observations and some conversations with some plastic producers, they even said that there is no long-term or bigger circle for plastics, because plastic recycling has limitations, and some of them mention even certain type of plastics could only recycle twice, only 2 times, and after 2 times it will be downgraded, and it will need more virgin plastics and more plastic additives or chemicals to add into that new products. So some producers propose to have grading systems or labeling for flakes or pellets that to be traded, to be used in the new products. Especially producers wanted to know what kind of the quality of the pellets or the raw materials that they are going to use and mix with the for the new products. Vito mentioned several times on several slides and also in the resources of IPEN, we found also bromophenol retardants and then bisphenols and phthalates accumulated in children's toys. And then in one of the study, it shows that children who play with that toys, especially hand to mouth, dioxins also can be detected in their saliva. So it shows how much the recycled products can be migrated or affecting us. So without that kind of information, what's the chemical content in the products, recyclers and also consumers will be blind with the products that we use, and the circular economy will have a longer a wider extension to cover also our health. So talking about circular economy, if we don't talk about chemicals, it means there will be health costs that have to be covered. And I would like to see more and more the word sustainable consumption and production to be used instead of circular economy. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you for that thoughtful response as well, Yuyun. And actually, you raised also a point that I want to dig deeper to, and let me turn now to Ana Paula. Ana, on the issue of transparency, transparency for chemicals in plastics. This is a critical issue. You mentioned that in your presentation, and we've heard that mentioned many times, including by Yuyun also just now, no? In terms of needing information. So both the EU and Norwegian proposals include specific rules on transparency. What good practices exist on transparency and traceability that can work without being too burdensome? Could you share any information with us?
Yes, yeah. I just when you shared this script, I had a different question for me, and I had prepared for this other question. So can you repeat? Because I was just like, what's happening? Sorry about that.
On the transparency of chemicals, how do you think we could address this without being too burdensome?
I mean, I don't think that is the burdensome is the word that we should relate when we're talking about transparency. Here there are 3 pillars of good environmental governance. That is access to information, it's participation, and access to justice. And if we don't have that, we won't be able to make progress, be in this treaty or be in any other environmental area. So I wouldn't use the word burden, and I actually frame as it's an obligation that already exists for states, and we need to be informed to be able to make this decision. And I think you also made a very important point on the circular economy, the circular economy. I heard that there is more than like close to 200 definitions of what that means, and how perhaps centering with sustainable production, consumption, but also on waste hierarchy, those will allow to have more increase that transparency as well. Actually, when I think of myself, put myself as a consumer, not as a human rights officer, not as a UN official, but just like as any other person, we are all consuming plastic. Something that makes me, the more I learn about, read what the science is revealing behind what we are consuming, I feel angry You know, I feel angry because of all the lies, all this disinformation. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't use the word disinformation. It's actually like how we are being prevented from understanding what it is, um, actually being fed to us, and the harm that this is causing. When we talk about the externalities of plastics, and that's something that I would love to see more coming out of the discussions. How much, like, one, if you're paying for, let's say, one in a bottle of water, how actually is the cost that is implying, that impact that it has also on the GDP. But just before closing, because I thought I was going to be asked the question on no criteria approaches. And I would just like to share some thoughts about that.
Sure,
Because,
sure.
actually not aware, and I think this is an important point, because no criteria approaches, I'm not sure what it is, and I see from the response of states to the questionnaire for the expert group 2 that many are in the same position. We are not aware of, completely sure of what no criteria approach means, and this is also related to transparency, the whole thing, no? And then, but I would guess that no criteria approach is based on a voluntary approach with some guidelines on this and that. And I just wanted to focus focus that plastic pollution is a global crisis, and that requires legally binding provisions through global targets and control measures and obligations instead of voluntary national determined approaches. Any other approach, including attempts to disregard the best available science to advance our interests or move away from global uniform criteria and rules, I believe it's a distraction that will take us away from addressing the plastic crisis. And efforts to address the human health impacts of plastic have largely been ignored, the global dimensions of the plastic cycle. So, as mentioned before, if a chemical of concern harms human health, it harms all people everywhere, meaning that chemicals in plastic needs to be regulated through IMEA, and that the treaty should focus on criteria approaches only. And I think that there are valid lessons here from the implementation of the Paris Agreement that can make a case for that. And apologies if the answer was all over the place.
No
and I
problem.
shoes,
No problem.
but here you go. Thank you.
Yes, no problem, Ana Paula. Thank you so much. So, one, thank you for emphasizing that on the issue of transparency, it's not being burdensome, but it's imperative. Transparency for chemicals and plastics is an imperative. No, and also for going to that important point on criteria and non-criteria based approaches, which I would like to hear more from Vito. Okay, so Vito, you're up next. What is your understanding of this non-criteria based approach, and what do you see are the advantages of each?
Thanks a lot, Leah. But I think it would be it's clear that each member state has a different understanding of what criteria non-criteria approach means. I think what we need to focus the most, and we've heard various types of approach. We've heard in this webinar how, for example, China regulates chemicals and chemicals in products, how the EU proposes and which reflects already on existing experiences. The point is, the main point is that it is going to be very difficult to have effective regulation of chemicals if we don't regulate them globally. If we have, if we give each country the freedom to regulate plastics as they wish, the chemicals in plastic as they wish, we will have like basically a non-effective regulation for various reasons. The first is that, as we've seen, chemicals hazardous chemicals can often travel around the world through litter. The Stockholm Convention has listed a chemical, UV328, also on the basis of the fact that it has a long-range transport because it attaches to litter, and it can be found then all over the world. So having national approaches basically is counter. It doesn't really make much sense. Second, well, all supply chains are are complex. There's very few products that are made entirely in one country. So you would have a component made in one country, a component in another, and they're often made of plastics. And so if we want to keep on trading these plastics and these products, we need to have global regulation. And so the main point is rather, do we need criteria? Should we have, as the EU is proposing, like a very specific endpoints, or should we regulate the chemical on the basis of expert groups that determine the harm? That is something that could be determined in different ways. The most important thing is that we have a mechanism to address chemicals in the treaty, and that it regulates all the trade of chemicals rather than thinking about specifically what kind of criteria it is. So we need to start, that should be the starting point.
Very clear. Thank you very much, Vito. I'm very sorry to say that we don't have time. In fact, we're already over the time, so we won't be able to open the floor for question and answer, for open discussion. We would have wanted that too, but we are very glad that there's already exchange happening in the Q&A box, and our panelists have been answering some of them. So thank you. The time is really not enough to be able to tackle all the different areas in this topic. But again, thank you so much for our panelists for sharing your thoughts. You've been very, very helpful for all of us. So at this point, we would like to call on Tadesse and Valentina to close our session and to share their final thoughts. This time I'll go first with Tadesse. Tadesse, please go ahead.
Thank you. Valentina and I were discussing, and I would like to give Valentina to reflect first.
Thank you very much. That is no problem. I can start with the conclusions. I would like first to thank all the panelists, all the experts for this enriching discussion. It was really good, and it's a timely discussion to have before the open-ended expert group and the INC 5. So thank you very much for that. I will try to be brief, but I have so many things to highlight. First of all, we heard that scientific approach is crucial, that we need to ensure a chemically safe circular economy. We heard strong voices concerned about the negative impacts on the environment and on human health, cancer cases and other chronic diseases that are increasing and are linked with the endocrine disruptive chemicals that are found in plastics. Existing conventions like BRS are not enough to address this plastic crisis. And for all that we heard today, it's fundamental that chemicals of concern and problematic plastics are eliminated, restricted, or reduced through this treaty. Also taking into account that production of plastics is predicted to grow along with exposure. So these chemicals and products should be controlled by its inclusions in lists in the annexes of the treaty. An ambitious treaty based on control measures and obligations with robust means of implementation for its successful fulfillment. A human rights-based approach will ensure inclusive and informed decision-making, aligned with robust, independent scientific evidence, and the needs of individuals, groups, and peoples to prevent the negative impacts of plastics on their human rights, including the right to health, the right to labor, and the right to a healthy environment, among many others. Finally, there is a clear need to have a pragmatic approach to ensure plastics are safe and to ensure chemicals don't harm people when are used, reduced, and recycled, as we cannot wait for decades to implement the treaty and to change the plastic economy. Thank you very much, and now I'm back with Tadesse.
Thank you so much for your insightful closing thoughts, Valentina, and for the summary. Tadesse, please.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Valentina. I agree fully with what Valentina reflected. And The reason why we were pushing on UNIA to have this treaty, a legally binding treaty, is to protect human health and the environment. So it's not a waste management treaty, it's a chemicals treaty and a health treaty. So what we should focus is first for this treaty to have a global criteria for chemicals of concern and a global commitment that's required to save the world. There are pushes to bring these like others for this criteria to be national. But for example, take Africa, which nation has a capacity to have its own criteria nationally. And it's an international product, which is transboundary, and we need a global criteria which can restrict or ban the chemicals of concern that are harmful to human health and the environment. And the other thing that we should focus on the treaty is the human health issue. We are talking about human health. We are talking about previously the microplastics in human blood, but now we are talking about the microplastics in placenta and also in sperm and all over the body. So it's the long-term impact is not yet verified and not known. So when it is going up and when the production, as it has been stated, is going very high, we are suffering and the environment is going to suffer. So we have to have a balanced approach to restrict the hazardous contents to be restricted, and also the focus on human health and on the environment to also have more attention in the discussions to come. For this, reusability, recyclability, and others are also some of the discussions that are going on. But with regards to reusability or recyclability, we have to also focus on non-toxic circular economy. And I fully agree with you, Yunus' reflection on sustainable production and the consumption aspect with a clear definition of sustainability without compromising the environment and human health and even the future generation. So these are the main points that we have to focus. And this is a global problem. So we need a global solution. And this treaty should also have a signature of global criteria so that we can have a global binding instrument to protect our health and to protect the environment, and also to meet the UNIA resolution. Thank you very much, and thank you all for your time, and thank you, Leah. Back to you.
Thank you also very much, Tadesse, for your thoughtful and powerful concluding remarks. So once again, thank you to all our speakers and panelists for your valuable contributions. Your insights have been incredibly enriching. We also extend our gratitude to our audience. So many are still online. Thank you for your engagement and participation. Now I'd like to turn it back over to Diana for some announcements. Diana, I give the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Leah. I would like also to extend our thanks to you for your excellent moderation. And though we are now we are at least 8 minutes late, I would like to announce the next session in this series, which will take place in early September. We will join, as you will see in the next slide, we will be joining with our friends of the Earth Negotiation Bulletin. We'll be organizing a session on updates and the view to the finish line of these negotiations. So I hope you will also join us on the 5th of September at 3 p.m. Geneva time online. And so with that, warm thank from our end also to our speakers, our attendees, and those who will be watching later the video of this event. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much for
Bye.
coming.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.